Good evening, y'all. We're glad you joined us this evening. I hope that you enjoyed some good food before you came in here. We need to stand up and get moving so we don't go to sleep. So if you'll grab your hymn books and turn to hymn 225. 225, there is power in the blood. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4, 225. If you'll stand. No, that's not what I want to sound like. Hold on. There we go. Turn to 229. Are you washed in the blood? There's a theme tonight. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4 again. 229. Is 234. 234. When I survey the wondrous cross, we will sing all 4 verses. 234. Phyllis, you open a word of prayer, please?
Amen. Anybody need some paperwork? Everybody okay? Y'all need some more paperwork? Okay. Y'all good to go? Need another one? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to talk about solitude and silence, which I don't get a lot of these days. I got 2 young kids, so I'm going to talk to you from a place of emptiness. I'm just kidding. I still get some, but thank y'all for being here tonight. We've been in this long journey that you're probably tired of now about the spiritual disciplines, and we are kind of making our way through. We talked about fasting last week, which is a great thing. I think I'm not going to blame this on Larry, but he's certainly planted the seed. We may do some fasting as a church. At some point in time in this transition, we'll see what God does. And so tonight we're going to deal with solitude and silence. I kind of chuckled. Megan right now is at a concert with my 2 kids in Charleston. So she's a brave lady, and there's not any solitude or silence going on with her right now. And that's just what you do when daddy's out of town. I guess I told the group earlier that I was meeting with that my son bit 2 people at school today. And apparently the teacher told him that she was going to tell his dad when his dad come to pick him up, and he told her, "My dad's turkey hunting." And so that's the life of a parent. So we don't get any solitude or silence. So we are deprived in this regard. But I do think it's very important. I think it's a spiritual discipline. I think in today's world, because we live in a noisy world, that you understand this more than anything. As I thought about it to get in here tonight, or to sort of put us in the space that I want you to think about the world that you deal with, is that there's a lot of noise in the world, and what I found is it's a lot of misinformation in the world. Do you feel that way now? I was talking to a guy that's in college probably 3 years ago. He's still in college now, but he told me, I asked him one time, we spent some time together. It was a ministry, another church I was in Charleston. It might be 5 years ago now. I can't remember, but I asked him, I said, "What's the greatest challenge you have?" And he said, I get so much information, I don't know what's right or wrong anymore. And I don't know if you feel that way, but I sort of feel that way sometimes. I mean, you almost read news and think, is this noise or fact? Like, is this really what's going on? I have no idea. And I think that's made things really murky in our life. One of the things that I think it's done, and we'll talk about some of this later on, but I think it's made decision-making really difficult. Some stuff I'm working on now as part of another project is how do we make good decisions as a Christian? And I think solitude and silence is a really big part of that. So I want to show you this just as a snapshot, sort of the first bullet on there. I actually put some scripture on here for you tonight. Mark chapter 1, verse 35 is a reference that you can go look at if you want to. But Jesus in this, I don't think that's correct. Is that correct? Yes, okay, so Jesus preaches in Galilee. In verse 35 of chapter 1 of Mark, it says that Jesus rose very early in the morning while it was still dark. He departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. This was kind of a common theme in Jesus' life. There's other places in it. You get it in Luke 5 as well. I'm going to read this to you. You don't have to necessarily make your way there. But Luke 5:16. Jesus cleanses the leper, if you'll remember this, and then now there is great cloud. It says there were great crowds that gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But Jesus, he withdrew to a desolate place and prayed. And there's a lot to that, but the reality of it is that this is sort of a pattern in Jesus' life. Jesus went into the wilderness and fasted. He always usually did it with a time of praying, but it's sort of been this thing that's handed down through Christianity. So really my cheesy way of putting this is if it was something that the Son of God needed to do, I sort of find it as a priority in my life, right? Or that's the way that I think of it. I mean, Jesus was the Son of God, and in his humanity, he needed to withdraw. He needed times of solitude and silence, and so I want to model that. This one toes the line with me. Would you say, do you say this is required as a Christian? I think it's probably pretty close. I think maybe the way I would put it is that to be a healthy, clear-thinking Christian, I think you need to spend a time alone with God. That's sort of what I would say. Do you need to go to the mountains of North Carolina and camp on a mountain for a week and be alone like Jesus? I don't necessarily know that, but I want to say that again, I think to be a healthy, thoughtful Christian, you do need periods alone with nothing but you and God. No music, no people, no anything. That would be the argument I make, and I think you may agree or disagree with that, but one of the reasons I believe that's biblical, I believe it's something that is wisdom, it's like a proverb, but I also think, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, that this is more and more necessary in today's world. It's a lot of noise. Let's talk a little bit about goals of that, and then we'll talk about how I do it in practice. So one of the big goals, aside from following Jesus as example, is I do think that it goes hand in hand with prayer. I believe I mentioned this last time with fasting. On these major moments in my life, I've gone to get alone and pray and be in the Word, and sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's, and these, I give you like these extreme examples, like I'm all godly, but there's only been once or twice in my life where it's been sort of an all-day thing. But usually it coincides with prayer. I do think you need to be alone with God in prayer in some capacity on a regular basis. I believe that wholeheartedly. I couldn't imagine leading a Christian life without doing that. I mean, it's just part and parcel to how you're supposed to operate as a Christian. I don't know that I've got perfect biblical evidence of this, but this is sort of a wisdom thing. There are some things I just do not think you can hear from God with the noise. I just don't. I think there are some things that you will only hear from God alone. What do you mean hear from God? Audibly? No. What I mean is that God will make clear things to you in silence through prayer about your life. Sometimes He will clarify something good for you. It doesn't even have, sometimes we think about this as self-examination, right? Like looking for sin. But I think a lot of times, even in silence and prayer, sometimes He'll do things like bring you back to what you should be thankful for. He'll remind you of things that you should be thankful for. And sometimes I don't think we can get that clarity unless we're truly alone with God in prayer. And so the big takeaway from this is that get alone to pray. And we'll talk about the practical manners in that. I think another reason we get along, the bullet point there, is to express worship and faith in God. I guess what I mean by that, in the plainest sense, sometimes I put things on here and I just want to make sure I'm being helpful to you in that. What is worship at its very core? Worship is when your heart is drawn towards God. And again, this is sort of like proverbs or wisdom or things that I just believe in. I don't think they're absolutely essential. I just think it's very helpful, is that I don't know how to explain this. Maybe y'all have experienced this before, but God will warm your heart to Him in private, unlike He will in other ways. That's about the best way I can put it. I mean, have any of you ever been alone praying and you can just sense the Spirit of God? You can sense God. You can sense His presence. They're just very unique things that happen in that. That's a form of worship. It's a form of faith in God. It's a form of, maybe I should put it this way, to get alone and pray is a way to say, God, I'm dependent upon you. God, I need you to do something, right? It's almost like fasting expresses that as well. It expresses your faith or your dependence or your need for Him, is sort of the way that I put it. And I'm convinced, I don't want to press this too hard, I'm convinced that there, again, are only some things that God can show you in solitude or silence. To me, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, it's got to be one of the reasons that Jesus did it. It's got to be one of the reasons that He did it, is because He was showing us that in this moment of solitude, in this moment of silence, and going to a place alone with God, God is able to show me and reveal things, and a lot of times prepare you for things. So it's just critically important. You express worship to God. You show faith in God. I find it to be biblical. I find it to be life-giving in a lot of ways, but which kind of gets me to my second point there. To be physically and spiritually restored. It's almost like spiritual vacation in a little way. You know, you think about going on vacation, or really what vacation should be, the American version of vacation is that you sort of unplug, right? You put it all down. You try not to worry about the email inbox that's going to be full and all the stuff that you've pretended like doesn't exist, and you go on vacation, and you do that to be physically and spiritually restored. And I've found that times of solitude and silence are a massive part of that. I think it's critical for pastors. I think that it's like this with here. You'll realize this as we go through this journey, but when I get done with y'all, we will have been through a pretty intense period, at least for me spiritually. It takes a lot out of me in a good way, not in a bad way, sometimes in a bad way, but with y'all, it's going to be good, I know. And I kind of have to catch my breath a little bit when I finish with a church, right? I don't know how long that period will be, but I will take some time to come up for oxygen. And it's very healthy for me to be spiritually restored. If you have your next pastor comes in here and he starts talking about things like a sabbatical, do not fight against him. Do not hold that from him. This is sort of a footnote, but I'm just trying to, again, I'm pulling the curtain back, but most people don't realize this, but pastors are feeding you, and they have to feed you from a place of being full themselves. So if you have a pastor that is empty, his teaching will be empty. His preaching will be empty. You see what I'm saying? Some people, are like, a pastor should never go on a sabbatical. I mean, I've got people that I love and respect. They're like, I'm going to preach 51 sermons a year. And I'm like, you're going to preach about 15 of those probably from a pretty empty place, if you don't go get restored. And I had a guy look at me one time and say, I don't think a pastor needs but about a week off a year. And I said, well, what he's feeding you is going to be awful, because he's going to be empty. I mean, it's just different when you have to physically and spiritually and emotionally feed and be a producer. And so often the best things that I write, the best sermons that I preach, the best material that comes out of me will come after a break. After a Sunday off or a month off. It's why a lot of times pastors are going on a sabbatical sometimes it's 5 to 7 years, somewhere around in there. They'll get 6 or 8 months off. A lot of times as guys go further in the ministry, they'll take summer breaks and things like that. And I think it's super healthy. I say all that to say it's the same for you as well. I mean, I think it's the same for you as well. I mean, let's be honest, this stuff can get dry and heavy, and you can get bogged down in this sometimes. I mean, Christianity can be heavy. Teaching the Bible can be heavy. It's not every day that you want to wrestle with the Sermon on the Mount, right? You don't want to just sit around and meditate on lust all day long. So it's just it can be a draining thing. So I think silence and solitude, even if it's not prayer, even if you're just alone, just to sort of decompress a little bit and be physically and spiritually restored, I think it's a big part of it. Another one on there that I wrote down is to regain spiritual perspective. It's really kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of things that I've been talking about. I'm really probably just saying the same thing in 10 different ways, but spiritual perspective is sort of what I talked about on Sunday with the kingdom of God. Sometimes it is only in a place of solitude that God will give you a spiritual wisdom or give you eyes to see. So as we navigate forward as this church, as you navigate forward, I've told you you're going to make decisions. Again, I hope you can begin to see how we're connecting all this. I try not to waste any space with y'all. Every one of you are going to vote on things and make decisions, and you're going to have a spiritual perspective. You remember I told you, I'm not going to take a quiz in here, but remember I told you a pastor can usually see who's praying, who's truly praying about things. It doesn't mean that you don't wrestle with things. Doesn't mean you're not trying to discern things. Doesn't mean that you need some time to see things clearly. But my point is that as we move forward as a church, you're going to need spiritual perspective. You're going to need to see things clearly. How do you get there, Britt? It's alone with God. So I tell people all the time, hey, listen, if something's going on in church and you're going, I don't really know about that. It's so cliche, but I'm like, have you prayed about it? What do you mean by that, Britt? Have you got along with God and said, God, I want to confess to you that I am a flawed human and maybe my view of this is flawed. That's my default, right? So the famous saying is that your first thought about something is usually wrong. You know that, right? When something comes to you, the first thought you have about it when you've got to make a decision is usually not the right thought. And I think for Christians, we have silence and solitude to give ourselves some spiritual perspective, to think clearly on it. And so we're really just saying the same thing over and over. My point tonight is that as we move forward as a church, get along with God. As we put things in front of you and as you begin to take steps forward in the transition, regain some spiritual perspective on things. I have had to take a lot of time in my life, and it's a lot different when you're leading a church, but to gain spiritual perspective on it. I don't know this for fact, but there has already been 2 or 3 times that I've woken up in the middle of the night with something on my mind with this church. And I will sit in bed for an hour or two in the middle of the night thinking about it. And I don't think that's because I'm stressed out. I think God's trying to give me spiritual perspective on it. And unfortunately, in my house, if you're going to be alone and quiet, it's going to be from about 12 a.m., right, to about 4 a.m., you know? And so sometimes I've wondered to myself, is this why God's waking me up on this? Because for this 2 hours in here, I'm just going to have to be tired tomorrow. He's trying to give me clarity on what we're doing. All those sorts of things. So don't take any of that for granted. If you wake up in the middle of the night with something on your mind, maybe God's doing it for a reason. Maybe you're in a moment where you're paused and you're asleep, and He wants you to gain some spiritual perspective on it. Really important truth, which leads to the next bullet point. Again, we're saying the same thing 10 different ways, but to seek the will of God. Really, I could have drawn a line through seek the will of God. This is the way I think about it just because I'm practical. I probably got, more practical in me than I want to admit at times, but I could draw a line through seek the will of God, and really what I could have said there is, are you thinking? Are you thinking about things? I don't know about you, but maybe it's because I deal with a lot of different people, but there's a lot of rooms that I go in. They haven't been here. I'm not saying anything about this here, but there's been a lot of rooms that I've been in with meetings with people that are supposed to be smart, and I'm thinking, is anybody in here thinking? I don't mean that ugly. I just meant, is anybody stopping and actually thinking about anything? You know what I mean? It's one of the things I'm scared of with AI, because you don't even have to think anymore. You just put it in there, right? And it gives you an answer out. I'm really concerned about this as we move forward. I think Christians are supposed to be thinking people. I don't think we're supposed to be eggheads. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the mind is the most powerful thing you have in your body, bar none. I mean, it is the single most beautiful thing that God created outside of your heart. And I just want to think. I want people to think. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying I'm the best at it, but I'm always trying to think. I don't have all the answers. I can't see things clearly. I think sometimes if your mind races, it might be bad for you, but sometimes there are decisions made, and I'm like, man, did anybody think? The old saying that I've joked about, I've probably said this in pulpits and places around, but I feel like a lot of people these days are ready, fire, aim. You been around people like that? They'll make you nervous as a cat. You know what I mean? You're thinking, are you aiming at anything here? Maybe y'all disagree with this, but I believe to think clearly about anything, you need to be alone in quiet. I believe that with all of my heart. When I write sermons, I've got other things I'm writing right now. I have to be alone, and it has to be quiet, and I have to think about things. And are we thinking people? How do we do that? I'm working on a project now. This is kind of almost like writing a book on humility. If you write a book on humility, are you even humble? You know, it's kind of this weird thing. Like, can you even talk about humility and be humble? I'm working on this project now about how to make decisions as a Christian. So you got to put a big star in a book that you're writing about decisions and say, number one, I'm not perfect at making decisions, but how do we as Christians make good decisions? And I think one of the things that I'm going to put in there, I'm writing a part of it is what I call fortifying. How do you fortify your life? How do you strengthen your life to make good decisions? You better be in solitude and silence. Does that make sense? There are times in your life where you're fortifying, you're doing things proactively. You're on the offense spiritually to get yourself to a place where when something comes into your life, you can see clearly and you're not scrambling, right? And then there's times where things just hit you in the face and you're like in damage control mode, right? You're making decisions out of damage control and you ain't got time to go to solitude and silence. So my point is that it's kind of like the old saying where if somebody says, or I've had people say to me, or I've said to people, it's been the saying in church, you better be prayed up. You ever heard that before? What they're saying is that you better fortify. And so my thing is you better be silenced and solituded up. That's not a word, but you understand what I'm saying? You better be alone with God so when life hits you in the chin, you're in a place to make good decisions. Are we thinking people, how do we seek God's will? It's kind of like we talked about last time. Get alone at some point in time with that. Get all of the facts. Take all the counsel, think about things, and then even if you're like, I feel pretty good about this, go be alone with God in it before you pull the trigger. And I'm not saying you will make perfect decisions, but I think you will make a lot better decisions. I cannot tell you the times that I thought, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And if you caught me on Monday, I was like, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then on Wednesday, I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. And it's not because I'm impulsive or I change my mind easily. I've been alone with God. So any church that I lead, and the people that have been behind closed doors with me know this, I tell them we deal in pencil, not ink in church. Why do we deal in pencil and not ink? Because I may get in solitude and silence and something may change. You know what I mean? I'm always want to be in a place where God can speak and change my mind and change my heart and help me see things clearer. And what I want to encourage you in tonight is you don't have to be a perfect decision maker. You don't have to have made perfect decisions. But I think that this is really pleasing to God. I don't think God's sitting up there like the way I've described it is if this is God's will for your life, I don't think he's sitting up there like this. Like, you better say the right thing and hold your mouth right and say the right prayer and fast 3 times a day. And once you do that, I'm just going to magically show you what I've been hiding you. But that's how we think of God's will sometimes, right? Like, if I can just hold my mouth right, he's going to clarify this thing. How do you find God's will? I think constantly in solitude and silence, he will get you there. He will take you to where he wants you to be. I found this, if y'all have people in Gen Z, millennial Gen Z generation, some of y'all can't even fathom this world, but those generations of people have a lot of options in this world and they wring their hands about decisions. Big time. Like, if I do this, am I going to make a decision? And things have got to be perfect. And I mean, if y'all have spent time around that generation, you know that. There's just anxieties through the roof about decision making. And I think some of it is just the noise. I'm like, hey, unplug the media, unplug the phone, unplug the TV, and let's just kind of get old-fashioned about it, you know? Just go be alone with God. And through that process, he will help you. do things. I hope that makes sense. And then one of the big ones here is to tame the tongue. So in other words, this is like my 8-year-old daughter. I'm like, just stop talking. Right? We have this conversation all the time. I think God sometimes looks at us that way. Just stop talking. The daughter analogy is on my mind, but Grace, she's a talker, man. I mean, she will talk you to death. And y'all know this. Y'all have had kids like this. And you're thinking, I don't have anything left in the tank. And I told her the other day, I'm like, you can't stop. You can't take a breath long enough to even hear what I'm telling you. And so I need 15 minutes of silence because I'm about to give you some instruction, right? And honestly, having a kid in the house, I think that's how God feels with us sometimes. I think God's like, hey, listen, I know you got all the answers and all the experience and you got a lot to say, but I need you, for lack of better words, to shut your mouth for a minute. And maybe if you'll shut your mouth and shut off all this noise in your life, I can give you some clarity about some things. It's magnificent, isn't it? Or am I the only one that feels this way? Yeah, you're just exhausted. And I'm like, man, I can't take any more questions today. And my Gray has a very active mind. And I told the team earlier that our son Wells, we call him Boo Boo. And I think Boo Boo is going to talk as much as Gray does. I'm like, what are we doing, man? Like, what is going on? So anyway, it's sort of to tame the tongue. I think it's a big part of it. So those are sort of the goals of silence and solitude. Sort of my big picture goals. Really, basically, is that how do we think clearly about things? And I think Christians have got to be alone to do that. So let's talk about it in practice. How do we do this for real on the ground? Maybe some takeaways from this. Minute retreats. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you got a busy schedule and you've got hectic things going on, I have a wife that works full time that's raising 2 children, and she ain't got a lot of free time and she ain't got a lot of downtime, and y'all know all about that. What I would say to that is that just put the timer on your phone and just take 1 minute, 10 times a day. Just 1 minute. Be quiet. God can speak to you in a minute. He can clarify things in 1 minute. It doesn't need to be 12 hours. And I've done that before. One of the ways that I do it, this may or may not be helpful to you, I'm just giving you ideas, is that sometimes I'll bounce from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And sometimes I'll take 1 minute. Just turn the clock on 1 minute, decompress, be alone. Don't look at my phone, don't look at emails, and just take 1 minute between meetings, So 1 minute retreats. A lot of times what will help with that is if you get up and go to a different space. Some of y'all may, I don't know all of your stories. You may or may not work at a desk all day long. This has been really helpful to people. I'm like, get up, walk outside for a minute. Just 1 minute. Go outside, get sunshine, be quiet, be alone, leave your phone at your desk. Minute retreats. It's kind of like, am I making this up? It's like micro-learning. Have y'all heard about this? You just get micro-learning, little bits of information. I don't want to get into a discussion about whether, in my purest mind, do I think it works, but micro, solitude, and silence. Good one there. A daily time of silence for Bible intake and prayer. That's sort of the classic way that it goes. I don't do this every day, but I do it a lot of days. It's sort of, I'm just sort of old school with it. I'm sort of old school, and I wake up early, and this is kind of how I roll. And we've talked about this before. Some days it is dry as a bone. Some days it is not what I would consider very fruitful, but that's just kind of the way it is. There's been all kinds of cliche ways to do this. Have a particular place in your house or a particular time that you do it. It just depends on how you're wired. But I think that that's something I would recommend to you. And I think that's truly a discipline. Extended times of silence and solitude, such as hours, days, or weekends. Has anybody in here ever tried to go an entire day and not say a word? No, anybody ever? Have you? Like the monk life, close? Like intentionally, or you were sick? Yeah. Good, bad, weird? Yeah?
For a while there, a lot of people thought I was Steve.
Yeah. I've wondered if I haven't ever done it. I was reading something the other day in the mound of junk that I read, but y'all may know there was some famous singer. I can't remember the details. I'm foggy on it. There was some famous singer. He or she would not speak for 24 hours before they performed. And the story that I read is that I don't know if it's like Celine Dion or Adele or some of these big giant singers. And whoever this person was in a restaurant with another famous person. And I think the story is that Barack Obama walked in, politics aside, the president walks in, they shut down the restaurant, and the president comes over to the table to speak. Whether you like him or not, it's still the president, right? And this person wrote on a napkin, "I'm not talking," and handed it to the President of the United States. And I thought, that's hardcore. But that was their deal. And whoever it was that was telling the article, or I can't remember the details of it, they were kind of a little bit humiliated. They were like, you need to, like, this is ridiculous, you know? And so some of you are thinking, I wouldn't speak either. But anyway, the reality of it is that I don't know that I've been a day where I haven't talked, but, you know, I think this is sort of something I touched on last time. And then finally we're going to be able to get out of here a little bit early tonight. You don't hear me yap on about this stuff, is the trade-off system. What I mean by that is if you're married or your life is crazy, we will trade off periods of quiet. You know what I mean? Tag team it. Give your spouse a break. Grandparents, if you show up at your children's house and take their grandchildren and give them 15 minutes to take a shower alone, they'll love you to the moon and back. Megan is I can't remember what, Megan's a runner, and so I'll watch the kids and she'll go run. And that's sort of her decompress thing. And I try to move mountains to let her run. I do other things myself. We try to tag team this. We're not great at it, but sometimes you need to decompress. But do that with your children, grandkids, whatever it may be. You may save their life. Pretty straightforward stuff here. How do you carve out silence and solitude? That's really all it is. So Richard Foster, who's this guy you don't care about, I like this quote. One reason we can hardly bear to remain silent is that it makes us feel helpless. Man, that's a good quote. We are accustomed to relying upon our words to manage and control others. If we are silent, who will take control? God will take control, but we will never let him take control until we trust him. Silence is intimately related to trust. That is a heck of a quote. That's been a part of how I've taught this stuff for years now, but I think that's really relevant to the future of where you're going. Again, you're going to be making decisions as a church, and sometimes you need to be silent and try to hear from God, and I think that it's all related to trust and control. This is very dangerous. That quote is impactful for people like me that talk, for lack of better words, that communicate in their everyday job. All I think about is words. All I think about is talking. All I think about is communicating. That's not all I think about, but a lot of what I think about is that. And pastors can get to the place where they believe their words can do a lot more than they really can. And so we need to remember, pastors need to remember, churches need to remember, everybody needs to remember that that what Richard Foster has to say there is very powerful, or at least to me it is. So, I think that's it. Turkey season opens in the morning, and so I'm going to practice solitude and silence in the morning. Hopefully not silence, but solitude, at least. What y'all got? Anything y'all want to talk about? Spiritual disciplines, solitude, silence. Anything on your mind?
Yeah, that quote down there, kind of what I was going to say is that, you need to embrace the silence and solitude. But in today's world, it's hard to carve out the time, so you have to make it a priority. And then when you do get that time, your mind is running, and it's hard to shut it down.
Mm.
And that's where you have that notebook, and you just write down whatever comes to mind, you can let it go, and trying to kind of stay focused. And
Yeah.
it's hard to stay focused at times, you know, because when we're quiet, our mind wanders. Sometimes it's the to-do list, sometimes it's, you know, things going on, and then eventually you kind of get it turned towards him.
Yep.
But it's kind of that transition period, once you get to that silent spot.
Very, very, very good. Really difficult to do today.
Just like when you go to bed at night, skeleton, good to bed, mind running.
Amen.
Go right to left.
My drug of choice is my phone. I'll get up and start typing notes on it at like 2 a.m. And Megan tells me that the blue light on my phone wakes me up, but I'm like, hey, it's okay. Anyway, y'all good? Anybody else? All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and life and just all that you do for us. And it is a noisy, busy world. And I believe that it's hard for us to hear from you in that, God. And so perhaps something in this will encourage us to be alone with you. I'm convinced, Father, and I don't believe that you would see it any differently, is that some of the only ways we can hear from you is to be in complete solitude and silence. And help us in this, God. Help us to follow God's way. I pray for this church as we move forward that we'll practice this. We'll be making decisions and trying to discern your will and trying to see clearly on what you're doing. And we all want to be on the same page, rowing in the same boat in the same direction, God. So it'll take silence and solitude and prayer and commitment to your ways. So just be gracious to us in that. Bless these people in here tonight, God. The ups and downs, the battles, the blessings, the goods, the bads of their life. Help them just to be able to navigate all that. Be gracious to them this week. Hold them in the palm of your hand. And we look forward to what you're doing in and amongst us and what you have in store for us. And we ask all of this in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen.